I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into my study because the air felt too open, too hollow, as if someone had scooped the life right out of the room. I reached for the light switch and froze when the walls appeared bare, the shelves stripped clean from top to bottom. A space once filled with the quiet comfort of pages and years of memory now looked like an empty storage unit. For a few seconds, I stood completely still, trying to understand how a lifetime of books could vanish overnight. My throat tightened as I scanned the room again, hoping I had somehow misread what stood right in front of me. She walked in behind me a moment later, holding a cup of coffee, and said it as casually as someone mentioning the weather. She told me she had donated the old clutter, as if the worn spines and quiet treasures of my life meant nothing at all. I turned toward her, waiting for her to laugh or explain, but her face stayed blank, almost proud of the cleared shelves. Something inside me felt like it tore a little, not from the loss of paper and ink, but from how lightly she treated something so dear to me. I asked her why she didn't talk to me first, but she waved off the question as if I were fussing over trash. My eyes moved to the corner where my wife's favorite reading chair used to sit, and the ache in my chest grew sharper. I asked about the one book my wife left for our daughter, the one she had promised to give her on a day she would truly need it. She raised an eyebrow and told me I must have misplaced it, as if my mind was more fragile than the pages she had thrown away. I felt something cold settle deep inside me, because her tone wasn't confusion, it was practiced dismissal. She didn't even look at me long enough to see the hurt her words left behind. I walked closer to the shelves, searching for any sign that even one book had survived her sudden cleanup. Nothing remained. Not the collection my wife gifted me through our early years, not the rare editions I saved for decades, not the simple paperbacks that helped me through long nights after she passed. The loss felt heavier than the empty wood in front of me. It felt like someone had reached into my memory and tried to erase it piece by piece. I wanted to ask more questions, but I could already feel her growing irritation with every breath I took. When I turned back around, she was sorting through a stack of envelopes on my desk, flipping them as if they belonged to her. I noticed a slip of paper sticking out from under her hand, something that looked like a donation receipt with a signature that didn't match mine. She slid it into her bag before I could reach for it, telling me that she took care of everything because I didn't need to stress myself. The way she said it made my skin prickle with unease, as though she was speaking to a child instead of to her father. I wasn't sure whether to confront her or keep quiet, but silence felt like the safer choice in that moment. I walked through the rest of the house, trying to calm the pounding in my chest, but every room felt different now. I kept thinking about all the times she insisted she was only trying to help, and how each time that help came with something missing afterward. Standing in my hollow study, I finally understood that this wasn't just about books or clutter. It was about control, the quiet, creeping kind that arrives disguised as concern. By the time she called from the doorway, asking if I wanted lunch, I already knew this was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. What would you do if someone cleared your home without asking? I started noticing the change in small ways, the kind that slip past you if you aren't paying attention. She began showing up unannounced, letting herself in with the spare key she once treated like a backup. Now it felt like an entry pass she didn't need my permission to use. She would step inside, glance around the room, and sigh as if the place were falling apart. She never asked how I was doing. She only asked what I had forgotten to do. Each visit left me feeling a little smaller than the one before. Her hands moved through my home like they owned the place. She shifted furniture that had stayed in the same spot for years, saying it was for my safety. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets without telling me, and when I reached for something familiar, it was gone or hidden behind something else. I kept asking her why things had to change, and she kept telling me I should thank her for taking care of me. But it didn't feel like care. It felt like someone slowly replacing pieces of my life while pretending it was all for my own good. I didn't realize she'd been talking to my neighbors until Mrs. Grant pulled me aside one morning. She asked if I was feeling all right and mentioned that my daughter had spoken to her about my memory slips. The words hit me like a cold wind. I asked what exactly she said, but Mrs. Grant simply looked away, pity clouding her eyes. I hadn't forgotten anything serious. I hadn't missed appointments or lost track of days, but it didn't matter. My daughter had planted a story, and people were already believing it. Then came the phone calls I never got to answer. I'd hear the ring, start to stand, and she would appear from another room, already holding my phone. She'd tell whoever was calling that I was resting or that I wasn't up to talking. When I confronted her, she said she was protecting me from stress. But stress was exactly what she was creating, step by step, control disguised as kindness. It's a strange kind of fear, being talked over in your own life, being shut out of conversations that used to be yours. Her partner entered the picture next, a man I barely knew. She introduced him as someone who helps families simplify things, a phrase that made my stomach tighten the moment he spoke it. He wandered through my home with the eyes of someone assessing value, not comfort. He complimented her for taking charge, saying not everyone steps up when aging parents start slipping. That was the first time I heard him talk about me like I wasn't standing right there. That was also the moment I realized he wasn't visiting out of concern. He was visiting out of opportunity. The first missing piece of mail arrived like a warning. I checked the box one morning and felt a jolt of confusion when it seemed lighter than usual. A statement I expected wasn't there. A letter from my insurance company never arrived at all. When I asked her about it, she said the companies must have stopped sending paper notices. But something in her voice felt rehearsed, too smooth, too quick. I checked the drawer where I keep my important papers, and though nothing major was gone yet, I felt a shift, like something invisible had slipped past me. By the end of the week, I realized I wasn't being helped. I was being handled. Every move I made was followed, questioned, or quietly corrected. I began to feel watched, not by cameras or devices, but by the calm, steady pressure of someone deciding who I was allowed to be. And the worst part was how gentle the cage looked from the outside. It looked like concern. It looked like love. But inside, every step felt smaller, every breath tighter. And for the first time, I wondered how much of my life she planned to take before I finally told someone the truth. The first sign came in a plain white envelope that looked like any other letter. I opened it expecting a routine notice, but the words on the page made no sense. It thanked me for updating my beneficiary information, something I had never done. I read the letter 3 times, each pass tightening the knot in my chest. When I brought it up to my daughter, she didn't even blink. She told me I must have forgotten and that she had helped me weeks ago. Her tone was soft, but the way she said it made me feel like my memory was on trial. A few days later, another envelope arrived, this one from my bank. It mentioned an automatic draft I didn't recognize. I called the number on the back of the card, and after answering security questions, I learned the payment was linked to an account I'd never heard of. I felt a cold wave pass through me when the representative asked if I wanted to confirm the change. I told him I needed time to think and ended the call. When I asked my daughter again, she sighed and said I must have forgotten approving it. Each answer from her felt like a door shutting in my face, one I used to walk through without thinking. That was when I went to my desk drawer, the one where I keep old checks and statements. The key was where I always left it. But when I opened the drawer, several folders were missing. Not misplaced. Gone. I stood there staring at the empty space, trying to convince myself I simply hadn't noticed it earlier. But I knew my habits. I knew my order. Someone had taken things that didn't belong to them. I checked the rest of the room, and the feeling of being invaded wrapped tight around my chest. It wasn't just clutter she was moving now. It was proof. Her partner's influence became harder to ignore. He started showing up during her visits, always with a tablet in his hand. He talked in a calm, practiced voice about streamlining assets and avoiding complications while aging. He'd look at me like a case file, not a person. He asked questions about my accounts that no one outside of family should ever ask. My daughter praised him for helping us stay organized, as if my life were a messy shelf only he could fix. Each conversation left me with the same uneasy truth. He wasn't helping me. He was positioning himself. I began writing everything down in a small notebook I kept hidden inside my closet. Dates, times, letters, conversations, anything that didn't sit right. I made notes about missing mail and strange drafts from my accounts. I recorded how often she redirected my calls or how quickly she dismissed questions. The act of writing felt like holding on to something solid while the ground shifted beneath me. I didn't know exactly what was happening, but I knew it wasn't an accident. And it wasn't care. It was something deliberate wearing the mask of responsibility. Patterns started forming in ways I couldn't ignore. Too many missing papers. Too many decisions made without me. Too many phrases from her partner that sounded like prepared steps in a plan. One night, as I looked at my own handwriting scattered across the pages, I felt a deep, quiet fear settle inside me. Not panic, fear with shape and weight. This wasn't about decluttering anymore. This was about control, permission, authority. Someone was building a version of my life on paper, one where I looked confused, forgetful, incapable. The worst part was how logical it all seemed from the outside. A caring daughter, a helpful partner, a man in his later years. The pieces fit too well, and that made the danger sharper. I closed the notebook and sat alone in the dim light, letting the truth sink in. If they could change paperwork without asking, if they could speak for me without hesitation, then the next step might be something irreversible. For the first time, I feared someone was slowly gathering the power to decide what happened to me, whether I agreed or not. Would these signs alarm you? I began to understand how far she was willing to go the day she spoke to my doctor without even looking at me. I had come in for a regular checkup, something I'd handled on my own for decades. But she stepped in front of me when the doctor greeted us, placing a hand on his arm like she was my interpreter. She told him I had been declining quickly, her voice low and steady, as if she were stating an unfortunate fact instead of rewriting my life. I watched the doctor's expression shift from neutral to concerned, and the room suddenly felt smaller. When I tried to speak, she cut in again, telling him I'd been struggling to keep track of things. Her words landed with the weight of a diagnosis I never agreed to. After that appointment, I tried to view my medical records online like I usually did. My access was denied. The portal said I needed authorized caregiver approval, something I never requested or assigned. I called the office, confused, and the receptionist gently told me that any changes had to go through my daughter. Hearing those words made my stomach twist. I had gone from a patient to a dependent without signing a single form. When I confronted her, she said it was for my own good and that she didn't want me worrying about medical details. The dismissal in her voice made me feel smaller than I had in years. A few days later, she arrived with a stack of documents she called safety forms. They were thick, filled with legal terms, printed in small, tight letters. I skimmed through the first few pages, and the phrase power of attorney jumped out like a warning light. She smiled like everything was normal and said we could get this done quickly. I felt a sharp wave of fear, realizing she expected me to sign away my rights without question. When I told her I needed time, her smile thinned, but she didn't argue. She just said, "We'll revisit it," as if my hesitation were a minor inconvenience. Appointments began shifting without my knowledge. I would receive reminder calls for checkups I had never scheduled, or I'd learn I had been rescheduled to times that didn't suit me. I knew exactly who was behind it. Each change chipped at the little independence I had left. I started writing the old appointment times in a notebook, only to return later and find new times I hadn't requested. My schedule wasn't mine anymore. It was being managed like I was an item on someone's task list. More of my mail began disappearing too. I'd find envelopes slid open and placed neatly on the table, or worse, I'd never see them at all. When I asked her about missing letters, she would shrug and say she handled them already, her tone too smooth to be trusted. Once, I found a stack of redirected notices hidden inside a grocery bag she left behind. They were addressed to me, but marked forwarded to her home. I held them in my hands, feeling a quiet dread settle into my bones. It wasn't neglect, it was strategy. I started censoring myself around her. I chose my words carefully, afraid that any sign of frustration would be twisted into evidence of instability. I stopped correcting her when she spoke for me. I stopped raising my voice when she made decisions without me. The fear of what she might claim next kept my thoughts locked behind my teeth. Every conversation felt like stepping onto thin ice, and she was holding the rope. Late one night, sitting alone, at my kitchen table, I realized I might need legal help. The thought made my chest tighten with shame. She was my daughter, the child I raised, the person I never imagined defending myself against. But the truth was impossible to deny now. She wasn't helping me. She was building a narrative where I had no voice left. Would you consider this a red flag? I found the book she never opened on a quiet morning when the house felt heavy with silence. It sat tucked in the back of the lowest shelf, the only volume left in the place where my library used to be. I pulled it out slowly, almost afraid she might come through the door and take this one too. The cover was worn from years of my wife's hands passing over it, a soft crease on the spine where she read her favorite passage. When I opened it, a folded envelope slipped out and landed on the floor with a sound that felt louder than it should have. Seeing her handwriting again stopped my breath for a moment. I knelt down and picked it up, my fingers trembling as I unfolded the letter. She had written it during her final months, something she wanted me to have privately. Her words were gentle but firm, describing the values she hoped I'd pass on, the importance of honesty, and the need to protect what mattered. She wrote about trust like it was a fragile thing, something that must be held with two careful hands. Reading her message now, in the middle of a house stripped bare of everything she and I built, felt like being pulled under a wave. She mentioned our daughter, lovingly, hopefully, but said she believed time would test people's choices, and she urged me to guard our memories with strength. Her letter felt like a warning she never meant to give. I realized then that my daughter never cared to open this book. She had cleared the shelves in a single sweep, tossing away years of my life without pausing to wonder what she might be throwing out. If she had looked inside, she would have found this letter, something more valuable than any bank statement she had intercepted. The thought cut deep, not because she missed the book, but because she missed the meaning. Everything she did lately pointed to a single truth. She saw my possessions as items, not pieces of my heart. She never once asked what mattered to me. She only decided what should matter for me. Holding the letter beside me, I gathered the paperwork I had hidden in the drawer she always ignored. Bank statements with strange withdrawals, insurance notices with dates changed, donation receipts I never signed. Each document fit into a timeline I hadn't wanted to admit existed. I laid them out on my dining table, creating a path of decisions she claimed I made but never did. Seeing it all together made my chest tighten with a mix of grief and clarity. It wasn't forgetfulness on my part. It was manipulation on hers. The letter gave me something I hadn't felt in weeks: direction. My wife's handwriting reminded me that I had once been capable, confident, and steady. I needed to be that man again, not for pride, but for survival. So I took a deep breath and made the call I'd been avoiding. I asked an elder law attorney for an appointment, choosing a day when I knew my daughter wouldn't visit. My voice shook, but the lawyer didn't rush me. He simply said, "Come in, bring what you have." Hanging up the phone, I felt both relief and a new ache forming in my chest. That night, I sat alone at the table with the book open beside me. I understood that going forward meant risking the last pieces of my relationship with my daughter, but doing nothing meant losing myself entirely. I refolded the letter and placed it back inside the book, then slid it into the drawer with the rest of my proof. As I locked it again, I held the key in my palm for a long, steady moment. That small piece of metal felt heavier than anything else in the room. Have you ever kept something safe because it meant more than others understood? When I walked into the attorney's office that morning, I carried a heaviness I could feel in my bones. He greeted me with a calm nod and spread the documents across his desk, studying each page with a focus that made my stomach tighten. His eyes moved slowly from signature lines to dates, and then to the missing sections that should have been filled by me, not by someone else. He asked gentle questions to make sure he understood the full timeline, and every answer I gave seemed to add a deeper crease to his forehead. I watched him compare the bank letters with the donation receipts, and then with the insurance notices, seeing how none of them lined up with the truth I knew. By the time he leaned back in his chair, the silence in the room felt heavier than his words. When he finally spoke, he called the situation deeply concerning, and the words settled over me like a judgment I had been dreading. He asked if he could bring in a colleague from Elder Protection Services, and I agreed before my voice could break. A woman arrived with a folder already marked with color-coded tabs, and she greeted me with a kindness that made the tension in my chest ease for just a moment. She asked permission to speak frankly, and I nodded, bracing myself for the truth I feared would hurt. She explained how subtle coercion often begins with small intrusions, then grows into financial control and medical manipulation. As she reviewed the paperwork from my drawer, she pointed out inconsistencies and unexplained authorizations that no elder should face without consent. Every page she touched seemed to reveal another sign that someone close to me had crossed a line. By the time she finished, I could barely swallow through the tightness in my throat. They spoke together in low, steady voices, outlining the patterns they saw. My daughter's constant presence, her control over my mail, the altered documents, the appointments she changed without telling me. None of it looked like simple care anymore. The caseworker asked gently whether I had ever felt pressured or spoken over, and the memories rose faster than I wanted them to. I remembered the way my daughter answered questions meant for me, how she redirected conversations, and how she always insisted she knew what was best. I had tried to dismiss the discomfort, telling myself she was stressed or worried or trying her best. But hearing two professionals describe it as exploitation made the room feel colder. It was as if they were naming something I had been too afraid to speak aloud. The attorney explained the next steps in measured detail, making sure I understood each part without feeling overwhelmed. There would be quiet inquiries, verification with financial institutions, and a review of all forms submitted in my name. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, but steady and official, designed to protect me without alerting the people they suspected. He assured me that my notes and timelines would help build the foundation they needed. The caseworker added that my caution in keeping the documents safe showed more clarity than my daughter claimed I had. Their words should have comforted me, but grief settled deeper as I realized how long this had been happening behind my back. Even as relief crept in, the ache of betrayal stayed sharp. When the meeting ended, they told me they would move forward immediately, but quietly. I stepped outside into the late afternoon air, feeling as if the world had shifted without warning. The street looked the same, the sky looked the same, but something inside me felt permanently altered. I knew now that this would not end with a calm conversation or a simple misunderstanding. What was coming would expose truths none of us could turn away from. Standing there on the sidewalk, I understood that the next time I faced my daughter, nothing between us would ever be the same. And for the first time, I accepted that confrontation was no longer a choice. It was already on its way. I knew the conversation had to happen, but I still felt my hands tremble when she walked into the room. She carried the same tight smile she used whenever she wanted to hide something, but it didn't reach her eyes this time. I laid the papers on the kitchen table, bank statements, altered forms, donation receipts with a signature that wasn't mine. She froze for a second before laughing softly, telling me I was overthinking again, as if the evidence were simply a mood I needed to shake off. I told her I wanted answers, real ones, not the gentle excuses she relied on whenever she felt cornered. The room felt smaller with every word she tried to dodge, as if she already sensed the ground slipping beneath her feet. She started talking fast, insisting she did everything out of love, that she was only trying to lighten my load, and that I should have told her if I didn't remember signing things. It hurt to hear her cling to that lie, pushing the idea of my confusion as her shield. I reminded her I write dates down for a reason, that I had watched my own father lose his memory piece by piece and swore I would stay aware for as long as life allowed. She didn't blink. Instead, she accused me of creating drama, then pointed toward her partner, calling him someone who understands how aging works. Hearing her treat my life like a case study left a bitterness in my chest I didn't know how to swallow. It was the first time I heard my daughter talk to me like I was already fading. When the officials arrived, she shifted instantly, her tone smooth and practiced, as if she had rehearsed this moment many times. She talked about my supposed forgetfulness, about my poor judgment, and about how she had been carrying the weight of responsibility alone. But every sentence cracked when the attorney unfolded the documents and compared signatures, and when the caseworker explained how redirected mail and altered accounts fit a clear pattern of coercion. Her eyes darted to her partner, who suddenly found the floor very interesting. The silence between them said more than anything they could have spoken aloud. For the first time, she realized someone other than me saw through the performance she had crafted so carefully. She tried one last time to shift blame, saying stress made her careless, that she never meant harm, that she had only been doing what she thought was right. But the evidence sat between us like a quiet judge, and every attempt she made only deepened the divide. Notices were handed to her, restrictions, temporary protections, formal warnings, and she stared at them as if they were written in a language she had never learned. Her partner stepped back, creating distance the moment accountability touched the room. I watched the truth sink into her face, watched the shock replace her practiced confidence, and it felt like watching a bridge collapse that I had spent a lifetime trying to maintain. No amount of love could repair what she had chosen to break. When they left, the house felt painfully still. I stood in the doorway, listening to the echoes of my own breath and feeling a mix of devastation and clarity settle into my bones. I had lost the daughter I thought I knew long before this moment. But today was the first time I allowed myself to admit it. The betrayal was sharp, but the certainty was sharper, and I knew there was no path back to what we once were. I closed the door gently, not out of anger, but out of acceptance, and let the quiet tell me the truth I had avoided for too long. The house has felt quieter since everything unfolded, but the silence sits differently now. It isn't the heavy kind that made me feel pushed aside or spoken over. It's the kind that lets me hear my own thoughts again, steady and unbroken. Most mornings I sit by the window with a cup of tea and sort through the small routines that make up my days. I cook simple meals, straighten the living room, and read the few books I still have left. I move slowly, but I move with purpose, not fear. Even paying my own bills feels like reclaiming something that was slipping away without my permission. I've learned to check things twice, not because I doubt myself, but because I value the independence I fought to protect. When I think about what happened, it doesn't come as sharp anger anymore. It settles more like a bruise that took a long time to form and will take even longer to fade. I still struggle to understand how someone raised in the same home as my late wife's kindness could speak about me like a burden waiting to be managed. Aging changes a person, that much is true, but it shouldn't erase their right to make choices or hold their own memories. Trust, once broken, becomes something you learn to hold with gloves instead of bare hands. I feel that lesson every time my phone rings, and I hesitate before answering, wondering who might try to decide something on my behalf again. I've spoken with other seniors at the community center, and I hear versions of my story in their voices more often than I expected. Some were pressured into selling homes. Some had accounts drained. Others were told they were slipping long before any doctor ever said so. We all share the same fear, that one day someone will look at us and see inconvenience instead of history. If you're listening to this and you have an elder in your life, I hope you understand how much dignity means to us. We may move slowly, or forget small details, or need help with certain tasks, but we are still people with thoughts, desires, and years of earned wisdom. Protecting an elder doesn't mean taking over their life. It means standing beside them, not in front of them. The wounds from my daughter's choices are still there, and I don't pretend otherwise. They show up in quiet moments, like when I walk past the empty space where my shelves used to stand, or when I open the book she never cared enough to read and find my wife's handwriting waiting for me. That letter remains my anchor, reminding me that love can be honest and steady even when people fail you. I know those scars won't heal completely. Maybe they shouldn't. They remind me to stay aware, to ask questions, to guard my decisions even from those who claim to know what's best. They also remind me that strength in old age doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's just a man sitting alone, choosing not to surrender the pieces of himself that still matter. I don't know what the future holds, but I face it with clearer eyes now. I've rebuilt enough of my life to stand on my own again, and the rest will come with time. The world does not suddenly become gentle just because you grow old. You have to meet it with whatever quiet courage you have left. And so I move forward, step by step, carrying the lessons, the losses, and the small victories that remind me I am still here. I've accepted that some parts of my story will always ache, but I refuse to let that ache turn into fear. What would you have done in my place?